Hello everyone, so welcome back. I'm Douglas Johnson. I'm a yoga teacher, ordained minister, certified Killaby inquiries facilitator, Zen practitioner. I've studied A Course in Miracles quite in depth, and I teach basically what could be called non-duality, spirituality, yoga. And today I wanted to share a talk about relationships as mirror to the ego. And I wanted to share something from one of my favorite teachers, who is Byron Katie, and I shared some of her work in a talk I did, I believe it was last week. So I wanted to continue sharing on similar topic. So again, relationships as mirror of the ego. So there's a great quote from her I wanted to share with you. The truth is, until we love cancer, we can't love life. It doesn't matter what symbols we use: poverty, loneliness, loss. It's the concepts of good and bad that we attach to them that makes us suffer. I was sitting once with a friend who had a huge tumor, and the doctors had given her just a few weeks to live. As I was leaving her bedside, she said, "I love you." And I said, "No, you don't. You can't love me until you love your tumor. Every concept that you put onto that tumor, you'll eventually put onto me. The first time I don't give you what you want, or threaten what you believe, you'll put that concept onto me." This might sound harsh, but my friend had asked me to always tell her the truth. The tears in her eyes were tears of gratitude, she said. Okay, so I love this passage. This is from one of her books that I've read, and I wanted to share that passage with you today in the context of talking about this relationships as mirror of the ego. So hopefully you can sense or see by what Byron Katie said there that this is extending beyond just our personal relationships or individuals. This extends to concepts of poverty, loneliness, loss, inequality, tumors, health, illness, death, life, cancer, all of these things. So this is the perspective that Byron Katie is coming from. It's a perspective of radical acceptance or radical love, where everything that arises is loved, is accepted. And I have to be careful here, because sometimes people hear this and they misunderstand, and it could be just where they are in their process, in their work, that they don't yet understand really what this means, and they try and sort of jump ahead. So I think we need to be really, really honest with ourselves. If we don't love our cancer, if we don't love our tumor, if we don't love inequality, if we don't love something, we need to be honest about that. But if that is causing us suffering, then on this path, a spiritual path, that is an invitation for us to examine, to look. And for human beings, for whatever reason, I think a lot of our suffering is around our perception of others. And so that can be a very rich field for inquiry for us. What is our relationship with others? Are we able to allow others to be themselves fully, however ignorant that might be, however unenlightened, unspiritual that might be, however repressed that might be, whatever the condition that we see them in, are we able to accept and love them as they are? Now, last week I spoke a little bit about, the last 2 weeks I spoke a little bit about shadow and re-owning the shadow, and this very much plays into that, because if we haven't done that work, then we will find we have a real problem with groups of people or individuals, or with illness or disease or inequality, or what's happening in the world in various ways. Now, this doesn't mean we condone any particular behavior. I want to be really clear about this, because it's not about condoning or encouraging behavior that we see as maybe unskillful, maybe as unnecessary, maybe as hurtful or harmful. Again, part of our experience is our own reaction to things, and really kind of loving and accepting our own reaction, our own response, our own desire. This is part of the work as well. We're not trying to shame ourselves or stop ourselves from any genuine response that comes up, whether that's an emotional response like anger or frustration or sadness, grief. We want to really fully own these and experience them fully. But at the same time, in my experience, we can do that without turning the other into the wrongdoer, whether the other is a tumor or cancer or, environmental waste, whatever it might be, whatever our personal crusade might be, whatever we feel really passionate about. I find that as human beings, and the work of embodiment is really about being able to hold these two perspectives simultaneously. So the absolute view of being able to love everything and everyone, including ourselves and our own reactions and responses to the world. And then also to not disown our own personal reactions and responses. So I understand that this might be very confusing, and I'm speaking from a perspective that, again, could be considered maybe, I don't want to use the word advanced, because it's not really how I feel about this type of work. Beginner, advanced, I mean, is a child a beginner? Is an adult advanced? I don't know. But there is a sense of nuance that can go into spirituality and spiritual teaching, where something that we're not really ready for, something that we haven't seen through yet, is really not going to ring very true for us. If you are not ready for a passage like the one I shared from Byron Katie, a few things can happen. One is you'll simply forget it. It just won't have any real impact. It'll almost be nonsensical for you, and you'll just very quickly move on to the next thing. Another possibility is it will actually trigger you, and you might get quite upset, and you might want to write her off as a teacher, or say that she's ridiculous, or that someone can't love cancer or loss or poverty, that those things are bad and we need to fight against those bad things. And I understand that perspective, because it's one that, of course, I've held, and I'd say the majority of human beings hold. Most human beings really believe in a sort of absolute good and bad. Many of us, without thinking, reflexively will label death bad. If I say to you, my father died, you will likely immediately say, oh, I'm sorry, or that's too bad, are you okay? All of these things, we don't think about it, but what we're really communicating with those things a lot of times is that it's a bad thing that has happened. So again, I'm not saying in every instance, but oftentimes this is immediately where we go reactively, just without thinking about it. Poor you, right? Death, that's bad. From a different perspective, death is a part of life. Cancer is a part of life. Inequality is a part of life. all the things that human beings see as bad or evil or wrong, these are all just a part of life, and they are inescapable. And so getting to the point where Byron Katie is with her realization is one where this is seen. And not only are they a part of life, we are life. In a very real sense, we are not separate from life. So again, part of what happens with shadow work is re-owning those parts of ourselves. And in one context, we can see this as sort of a personal human egoic activity, that I have those things inside of this individual. So that's one way of seeing it or interpreting it. But I actually don't really stop there. I actually go further and say that all of it is part of the self, the true self, the absolute self. So not only is this personal human's experience a part of the totality, everyone else's experience and everything else is a part of that, the true self, our true nature. So what does this have to do with relationships? Well, in my experience, relationships are very, I don't know if it's a mechanism that works inside of us, or if this is a universal mechanism. I'm not really sure how it works, but I suspect maybe both. But what I find is that relationships will mirror back to us our ego, places where we need to investigate. So a great way to work is just to constantly reflect on your relationships and don't accept anyone from this. So how are you feeling about your spouse, about your parents, about your children, about your boss, about political leaders, about world leaders, about world organizations, about movements, about your spiritual teachers, if you have them, or other people who are on the path? What is your view? And again, this isn't to deny things that we see. So we're not trying to plug our ears and, do one of the la 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 la, everything's great, everyone's perfect, because that may not reflect how we're actually seeing things. And if that isn't how we're actually seeing things, that's the work. So I want to be really clear. This isn't about trying to deny the things that we see. Rather, it's trying to inquire into them. So last week I shared a little bit of Byron Katie's sort of process and how she goes about that. And that's something you can look up online. It's fairly accessible. The Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. She really says, go ahead and judge other people and do it really harshly, be really honest. And then again, as you do that, you can begin to re-own parts of yourself that you've lost and see through those types of things. There are other ways of doing inquiry in the community that I'm a part of, which is Scott Killaby's community, where I'm learning inquiry. There's a process that we go through called the we space. And I find this super, super valuable, because what I'll find in my own work is I don't find peace until both I am free of judgments on myself and I am free of judgments on others. So in the past, I've done a lot of work on both sides of this. And in my experience, unless both have been processed, then the feeling of stuckness, the suffering, will persist. So if either I haven't forgiven myself for something, then I will be suffering. And then if I haven't forgiven others, for something. And it's not just forgiveness, it's really allowing, it's really giving permission to be what you already are. As human beings, we have this conception or idea of perfection, and we bring this into things. Perfection goes along with what Byron Katie said about right and wrong. So we learn very early, don't we, as children? Our parents tell us, don't do that, that's bad. Do this, that's good. And most of us have never questioned that concept of good and bad. We become adults, we go to our graves sometimes with this concept very well established, that certain things we do and others do are inherently bad, and certain things that we or others do are inherently good. As Byron Katie said in that passage, if you don't remember, you can rewind and listen to it again. She said it's our concepts of these things as good and bad that cause us to suffer. So she didn't say that suffering is in having a tumor and getting cancer and having poverty and being alone. None of these things create suffering in and of themselves, but it's our conception of good and bad around them that create the suffering. So this is an important concept if we want to be free of suffering, and that's really what I see spirituality ultimately about. Eliminating suffering, seeing the truth, being free. And in my experience, the relationships I have with others are so valuable in doing that. So as I said, I'm not sure if the mechanism is a personal one that operates inside each of us, where we will see others as lacking in a way that reflects our own ego, where we're stuck, or if the universe simply brings us together with people who will mirror back to us things that we need to see. So I often feel like when I have somebody difficult in my life, in my face, and if I'm suffering with having them in my life and struggling, that, you know, this person is reflecting something to me that I need to see. Now, I don't want to paint it all in one way, because sometimes what we may need to see is that we have to be better at setting boundaries. So this isn't about being a spiritual welcome mat. I'm not saying that every time you have someone difficult in your life, the answer is simply forgiving them and bowing and being the more spiritual one, or walking away, or somehow closing down and being quiet. That somehow means you've been more spiritual than them. I think relationships come into our lives, again, either we create them through our perception, or the universe somehow brings us who and what we need to reflect back at any given moment. Those places where we have unseen parts of ourselves. Again, this is a kind of shadow work that I'm talking about. So I'm going to invite each and every one of you to pause and stop and think about individuals or people in your life who you have a real hard time with, who you have a lot of sense of otherness with. Again, yourself as good and lacking those qualities, and the other as bad. Or, as we discussed when we talked about shadow, it can actually flip, where we see others as good and whole and healed and accomplished, and we see ourselves as lacking, a sinner, unworthy, something along those lines. So again, either of these perspectives are one that really aren't in line with truth. They really aren't completely true. It's a very narrow perspective that we're holding if we believe that. And I really appreciate that Byron Katie touches on that about the good and the bad. This is touched on in Taoism as well. the concept that good and bad really aren't created until we make them. We create them in our minds as human beings. Squirrels, dogs, birds, plants, trees, they don't have this same conception of good and bad. Everything is a mutual rising. And when we really see this and experience this as a truth, and we see and experience our true nature, then we can see and appreciate this. At the same time, this doesn't mean as a human individual, this individual can't set boundaries, stand up for him or herself, take action. But what we find is that action comes from a different place than an egoic place of suffering, from an egoic place of fear, from an egoic place of lack. It comes from a place of compassion, love. It's a very different energy that moves us. And so, again, you can take this work into your own life and self-reflect and see where are those people who you are struggling with in terms of your relationships. Can you see the good in them? Can you see the good in their intentions, even if they're completely misguided? Can you find it in yourself to put yourself in their shoes and see how, if you believed what they believed, how you might reach the same conclusion that they reached? Again, it doesn't mean you have to agree with the conclusion they reached. It doesn't mean you need to condone their behavior. That's not what any of this is about. This is about, as I often say, the human heart, mind, and you can include gut too if you want, but the human heart and mind. This is about finding a sense of wholeness and peace there, and then moving through the world with that. And when you've really found that, that really allows you as an individual, as a human individual, as a small self, a great deal of freedom and joy and peace. And you give that to others. You allow that for others. It doesn't mean you can't take action. It doesn't mean you can't stop injustice where you see it. But there is a lightness to that. There isn't such a strong sense of righteousness, maybe is the word I'm looking for. It's held with a sort of a light, playful touch, if you will. The whole thing in yoga, we have a word for the sort of cosmic dance, if you will, lila, which is like the cosmic play. And I like this concept because it feels like it's really true. I can, in a sense, on a very deep level, kind of pretend to be me over here, and you can pretend to be you over there, and we can pretend to disagree. We can pretend to kill and hate and do all the things that human beings do. And we can really get into it, and we can really enjoy it. But that's the key, is we really want to stay in that place of enjoyment. I know it sounds strange, but my experience is we can enjoy anger. We can enjoy sadness. We can enjoy conflict. We can enjoy disagreement. We can enjoy every process that this life has for us. And this is what I feel Byron Katie was pointing to with that quote that I shared. Can we enjoy having a tumor? Can we enjoy the death process? Can we enjoy loss? Like she said, you can't love me until you love that tumor, because anything you project onto that tumor, the minute that I'm not what you're expecting me to be or wanting me to be, that will be projected onto me. And this has been my experience. So this isn't something that we can hear intellectually and simply do overnight. This is a process of doing a lot of work and introspection. And this work can be done with many of the tools that we have, with meditation, yoga nidra, to some degree with the asanas and postures, with the energetic work that we do, and the newest tool that I am offering, which is inquiry, which is again just sort of reflecting. And this is a process that you can learn by working with me one-on-one. But it's a process, again, you can start on your own just by starting to reflect and ask, if somebody is bothering you, you have a problem with somebody, beginning to ask questions about what is bothering you, why does it bother you, doing some of that shadow work I spoke about in the other talk. So anyway, everyone, I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you for listening. And until next time, namaste and have a great day.